Good afternoon, and welcome to the Beyond the Blueprint webinar series. This series empowers health IT professionals with the latest insights, strategies, and design principles required to seamlessly integrate digital tools within their projects. Whether you're embarking on a hospital remodel, constructing a brand new facility, or undertaking a targeted renovation, technology and innovative design is playing an increasing crucial role in shaping the future of healthcare delivery. In this series, we explore how to integrate leading-edge technologies and design processes to enhance patient care, optimize operational efficiency, and drive a positive and a compelling return on investment. My name is Greg Malkery. I'm the Managing Director at Spyglass Consulting. I'm also the host for this series. Joining me today is my co-host, Keith Washington, a renowned serial entrepreneur and a respected board member at Companions in Courage. Keith, do you have any opening remarks?
Yeah, Greg. Thanks for that. So excited to be here today talking about design. So a lot of what, Beyond the Blueprint represents is trying to make things easier for care teams to coordinate, to be more patient-centered and focused. And I think the topic today is really ideal for that kind of mission.
Great. Thanks, Keith. I'm also pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Grant Geiger. Grant's the founder and CEO of EIR Healthcare. EIR Healthcare is a company focused on modular construction and integrated smart room technologies within the healthcare industry. Grant, welcome to our webinar. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Greg. And first and foremost, thank you to Keith and the Simplify team and Greg for having me today. I'm, obviously looking forward to sharing a little bit more about my background. But as Greg mentioned earlier, CEO and founder of EIR Healthcare, I've spent about now close to over 15 years in the healthcare industry, and I'm a industrial engineer by training, and also started, as many people will appreciate, implementing EHRs for hospitals around the country when we all moved to the Affordable Care Act. So I've had a breadth of experience within the healthcare industry and looking to share some of my insight with you all today.
Great. Hey, thank you, Grant. Now, before we dive into our discussion, I want to express my gratitude to our valued sponsors, Storage Systems and Simplify Medical. Today, we're fortunate to have Lars Anderson from Storage Systems with us today. Lars, can you please share a brief welcome?
This is Lars Anderson with Storage Systems Unlimited. We're a distributor of a number of different storage items, including telehealth carts, partner with our good friends over at Simplify. So looking forward to a nice education here on how things are developing and where we're headed.
Oh, thank you, Lars. Well, during today's webinar, Grant's going to discuss how modular construction and smart room technologies are revolutionizing healthcare infrastructure. He's going to share valuable insights on how to overcome implementation challenges and the importance of change management, which can lead to improvements in patient care and hospital operations. He'll also provide us with some success stories and strategies for measuring and calculating a compelling return on investment. So with that, why don't we get started? And maybe we'll start with systematic design. Grant, based on your experience with modular construction, can you briefly share with us the importance of systematic design?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, from our perspective, what we always look at is systematic design is the integration of systems thinking and design thinking into one practice. And these two things are truly independent of each other. But we look at it and say, it's how do we build something for our client, but then how can we also provide value in being able to monitor it, provide data, and ultimately, over a long term, provide insight into the life cycle of that asset that we built, and think of, how do you truly capture what's going on inside your facilities. And, the old saying, I think it was Peter Drucker who always said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. This is, another way of us looking at it and saying that, healthcare, and particularly for construction, we look at the four walls of what's inside your facility, but we truly believe what those walls are, how it's made, what it looks like. All of that's up for discussion. And, at the end of the day, if we can integrate systems thinking and design into the buildings that we put together, we end up with a better healthcare experience for patients. So, an example that I like to give in this is we had a meeting a few years ago with a major health system. VP of facilities made a comment to us in the meeting, and he said to us, at the end of the day, we know what our bed tower is going to look like. We know what we're building. I don't understand why every time we open up a new facility, we always start with a blank sheet of paper. We know what the ideal situation is. So how do we take what is going on today in our facilities, and how do we take what we're trying to build and bring those things together? So, ultimately, we think that is, I'm going to have to edit the end of this, but but ultimately we think bringing those things together bring the best outcome. So.
Great. Hey, thanks, Grant. How do you see systematic design principles impacting people, processes, and tools in the span of your implementation of a modular construction project?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure if there's any clinicians listening, they're thinking people, processes, and tools within healthcare settings are already very well managed, probably even over managed to a certain extent. But in my thinking and the way that EIR Healthcare looks at this, from a design and process standpoint, the reality is for healthcare, we're not there yet. We don't actually have a lot of insight and information. Really a good reference for this is there's a book I read a few years ago called The Covert Life of Hospital Architecture. And it is written by two professors, one in the US, one in Europe. And, in that, they're talking about the relationship between design and medical outcomes. And they did a study that was recently done where they found that there's really a direct correlation to the proximity of a patient room in relation to the nurse stations. And in the study that they did, which was, I believe, in an ICU, there was a statistical difference in the morbidity rate depending on where that patient was located, which is completely independent of the clinical care that's given, the drugs that are prescribed, the equipment that they're using. You're assuming in those cases all those things are the same. So, and when we go back to people, processes, and tools, when we say systemic design, we're saying, okay, we know what's going on the floor, but how can we now actually take a look at how is the floor designed and what are the people and processes that are already in place? How is that affecting the actual outcomes, and how can we change those things to make improvements? So.
Great. Hey, thanks, Grant. Maybe take this from a different angle. Maybe you can explain the impact of systematic design on healthcare efficiency and value-based outcomes.
Well, it's an interesting question, right? I mean, the thing here is, and I think I said this to Keith already once before we talked about this. If you go to HIMSS, you go to any of the large, events that we as members of the industry all attend from a technology standpoint, the solutions that are out there today are point solutions. They're looking at solving a specific problem. And that's how the industry operates. It's not necessarily a bad thing or a wrong thing. But, if you think about, the example, the most common, most famous, EMR company in the world, Epic. Epic originally started, and Judy Faulkner started that company in Wisconsin with a focus on psychiatric data and providing an EMR for that specific clinical use. So I think as an industry, sometimes it's hard for us to take a step back and look at things holistically across an organization or across a health system. And the bigger the system is, I think the more complicated that becomes. So again, for our sort of focus at the end of the day, we're trying to work with our clients to get them to think about these problems in a different way. Instead of saying, I have a problem that I need to solve for my pediatrics, we're going to say, well, okay, we'll take a look at that, but let's take a look at what's going on broader within your system, and how do we sort of rearrange things to think in a more of a macro scale. So.
Yeah, and I think, Grant, that's all really great to hear that thinking, because I think that's, like you said, I think that is part of what you and I have talked about, and it is one of those sort of daunting challenges for the industry that tends to just default to what they've done in the past. And just there's so much opportunity, to take that project. And what we like to say at the Beyond the Blueprint language is to integrate and co-create, so that there's a lot of different problems and processes and people that are involved. And once you've started to design for that, then you build on that. So instead of every time going back to the blank page and starting from the beginning, you're building from a foundation where you've actually learned something. And I think in healthcare, what you're doing is the business model actually supports that. So health systems, they have less and less wherewithal to go out and take all these point solutions, figure out how they're going to work together, act as their own integrator, and think it's all going to be okay. Like it really, what you're doing, I think, really does get to the heart of a lot of the issues that they're facing, where it's consolidating the supply chain, it's establishing best practice, and then building on that, like a learning, growing organization that keeps adapting to circumstances and sort of like designs for change management, and instead of just defaulting to it's always the same. So I really appreciate what you're doing, and I think it's spot on.
Well, and I think, Keith, to that point, I mean, we look at it and say, if the room is where the patient is spending a majority of their time, and you as a health system are looking for ways to interact with the patient, to improve, for example, patient experience scores, HCAP scores, to improve, the overall well-being, you're probably looking for solutions, like I mentioned earlier, in places like HIMSS and elsewhere. But you have to put those in after the fact, right? And so, because the reality is, construction in healthcare is also a point solution. You hire a contractor, they go to a specific job site, they build one building, and then they move on. And so we're kind of saying, no, wait a minute. The room is always the same. So if we can help iterate with you, to your point, Keith, and we can help put in new technologies and take old ones out, and I'll use the word modularize, right, which we'll come back to later. That's going to be better for you as a health system, So
yeah, I agree. And even like you were saying, some of the thinking. So one of the things I do in my day to day is I do a lot of travel, and so I'm on a lot of airplanes. I've had a chance to be, 2 million miler on Delta Airlines, and so I'm flying in and out of Atlanta all the time, and so I look, to me, I mean, sometimes it overwhelms people, but to me, the Atlanta airport is by far the best designed airport, because it's the biggest volume, it's the highest capacity, it's the most efficient. But, you go around, and all these airports were designed completely independently. Like no one learned anything about airport design. And it's like, and I think the Atlanta airport now is like 30 years old. And it is held up. It is rock solid, you could tell they really thought it through, everything about it, in order to handle the kind of traffic, right? The world's busiest airport. And like I said, for some people coming in, it's daunting because they don't know it. But if they knew it, like a lot of these health systems, like say if they start to establish best practice, they overcome that initial obstacle. Well, this is different. I'm not used to this. But once they've got it, I just wanted to share that, because when you said it that way, I'm like, yeah, that's been my lived experience dealing with all these airports.
Yeah, right.
All right, Grant, hey, let's talk about innovations in patient engagement. Grant, can you provide us an example of how MedModular's integration into a healthcare facility helped improve digital patient engagement? I think in some of our offline conversations, you had two compelling examples. So we'd love to see if you could share those with us now.
Yeah, so I mean, they kind of go hand in hand, but we're working with a client right now in California, building clinics for them, and what our approach is, and Greg, you mentioned MedModular, so I'll just take a step there and back and just talk about that. So MedModular is our modular patient room. We in 2018 started on a project, and our goal was, how do we build as much of the patient room and ideally up to 100%? How do we build as much of the patient room off-site? How do we take the four walls, again, like I mentioned earlier, and how do we take that experience and how do we industrialize it? And so we launched that product, MedModular, in 2019. And these clinics, which are coming online here in California probably next year, will feature this Modular technology. So the integration and the question that you're asking, what we're doing there is, we work with a suite of partners to plug in technologies that are on the market today, which improve the patient experience. And for our client, that's important for them because the patient experience is also now tied to their reimbursement. And so, the one, there's a couple examples I'm going to go through, but one that I like to mention is with a partner of ours called Sky Factory, right? So they're interesting product. It's available off the shelf, but it's a static LED screen which can be used in patient rooms or exam rooms, operating rooms, things like that. And the reason why we use it, and we selected it for Modular, is because it's a feature that actually reduces, and there's been clinical studies to support this, that reduce anxiety and stress in patients both post-operatively and pre and in exam rooms and those types of other situations. So by a significant amount, I think it's like around 20 or 30%. So that is a technology among many others which are integrated into the room, and they show up at the construction site on day one. So, and they've already been tested and commissioned and worked. So, there isn't a follow-up procedure where something like that type of technology has to be installed. Once the building's up, it's actually delivered, when the building is manufactured. So, that's one example of many. So.
Yeah, so I can reflect on some of that, Grant, where when I worked at PCare, we had interactive patient system, and by far the most compelling content was relaxation videos that just help the patient,
Mm-hmm.
just like what you're describing, right? You have the patient in a state of anxiety, being in the hospital, going through the health system, going through their treatment. But if you give them little touches like that, like you're saying, design the room to give them some positive distraction, help them relax. It really is incredibly important. We learned so much by tracking that data. So totally would let's say reiterate that point is spot on.
Yeah. Well, and Keith, to that comment, I mean, that's only from the patient perspective, right? So from the clinical side, we look at things too. I mean, obviously with Simplified, looking at the technology of how do we get, clinicians in a position where they can chart, they can interact with the patient, and they can be mobile, right? And, by integrating that type of technology like yours, Keith, it's another example. So we're not just looking at the patient, we're also looking at the clinician. We're also looking at facilities. So we're looking at things, for example, how is the MEP designed? How is the MEP engineered? And then how do we set it up in such a way so that it can be accessible for facilities and maintenance down the road, so that they can make upgrades and improvements. And also, let's standardize. So let's standardize now what that looks like for the clinician and for facilities and everybody else. So it's the same no matter where their rotation may take them, because one day they may be in this clinic, but next week they may be at a different one, served on a service call or visiting a patient. And they want to know that the same equipment's there, that they can rely on.
Right. So. And I think that's also a part of, I think, what we're trying to explore with Beyond the Blueprint is this idea of standardization, particularly looking at it from the supply chain professionals' point of view, because all these supply chain professionals that are trying to source this material and make sure that all this stuff shows up on time and it works the way it's supposed to, like, they can't be just randomly changing all the requirements, right? So having that principle, I think, really is important to the scalability of the operation, that both supports, say, more patient-centered care, but also like staff comfort level and let's say more, efficient use of their time and talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's interesting you said supply chain, thinking about, procurement and those types of things. And the reality, and this is part of the why of what I do and what I'm doing at EIR Healthcare specifically, is because, the reality is, if you build a patient tower today with traditional construction, if you're an academic medical center, let's say you're building a 300-bed tower, that you're going to make decisions from a technology standpoint today that may be obsolete by the time the building is finished, because right now traditional construction is building bed towers somewhere between anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 years. And so if you're a technologist, or if you're a supply chain or procurement person, and you're making selections for what's going to be in that facility, you have to have that some sort of magical crystal ball, I guess, to be able to predict where it's going to be. But with something like modular construction, we're reducing the construction time frame from 40 to 60%. So it's a situation where you can make a choice today with us and our partners on a technology standpoint and expect, at least in our case, you're going to expect to have that facility open and using that stuff a lot sooner than you would previously.
So so I've got to follow up on that topic, because I think interesting, because I had another let's say some feedback about that idea of trying to design like a facility that's going to be around 50 years from now, let's say in the terms of like an autonomous vehicle, infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. So they build now more intentionally, not a big parking lot, but a garage that's in the basement, because that way you can always convert the garage potentially into, let's say, space that you could use for offices or other purposes, right? Because just there could be, so in your construction, let's say maybe, is there a hybrid where there's some, traditional construction, like building a parking deck and you stack your modular rooms on top of it, something like that? What is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's always in today's world where we are today, there's always a hybrid approach, because we can't do everything off site. So coming back to our original goal, right, Keith, I said we were trying to build 100% of the patient room back in 2019 off site. And, we got pretty close, but we didn't get there all the way. And so on our sites today, traditionally our project sites, you still have traditional construction doing all the site work. They're doing the foundation. They're doing all the civil infrastructure. And we're actually doing our manufacturing simultaneously while the on-site work is occurring. And so I think, to your question, or your I guess your comment, really, that will probably continue in the industry for quite a while. I don't think that's changing anytime soon.
Yeah, that's part of the design, right? That's part of the process. It is. Yeah, because then you have to adapt to the community and the building standards and the codes and all that.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Exactly. Things aren't always going to be the same. And it's interesting too, because then even within states have their own regulations, which are higher or lower. Like California, very stringent on what you can build there, right, in healthcare.
Right. With the earthquake, right. With Oshpod. Yeah.
Yep. So.
Okay, let's move on. Let's start talking about implementation challenges. Grant, what challenges do healthcare organizations encounter with modular construction and smart room technology integration, and how have you addressed these issues in some of your past deployments?
So I think, first and foremost, it doesn't matter if it's modular or traditional. You're going to have, challenges in construction today, because there's a labor shortage. Let me try that. There are material shortages, and there's also, issues in terms of approvals and regulation that take a long time. And those are all independent of whether it's modular or traditional. But, I think for modular to be successful for us in terms of what, challenges do we see there, what we really want to be able to sort of have as a good groundwork, or a good ground basis, is that, we have buy-in from our leadership, from the client side. So, CEO, C-suite, for example, being bought in, but in many cases, also making sure that whoever their construction partner is also bought in, because we're not, as Keith and I talked about earlier, right? We're not doing 100% of the project. We might be doing 80% of the project or 60% of the project. So, there's still the traditional umbrella of a traditional, of a GC and work being done there. So those folks also have to understand the concept, and where you see a challenge, right? A natural challenge that automatically pops up in that situation is understanding roles and responsibilities between, okay, well, in this new world where 80% of my project is built in a factory, who's doing what now? I don't have laborers on site maybe who are doing electrical installs or MEP racks or things like that. They may be coming from a factory, right? So, that's a challenge that comes up, in a lot of those conversations. And then I think in addition to that, you're also always going to see issues around financing, making sure a lender understands what's going on, and so in that situation, we're still building the same building, it's still the same process. You get the end result is the same. But for example, when you're in a financing situation with a modular project, you'll see that the drawdown schedule is going to be a lot different than traditional construction, because you're going to pull a lot of funds up front to purchase long lead items, and your manufacturing partner is going to require probably somewhere around, I'm going to say probably 30, maybe 40% of the entire construction budget very early on, so that they can start the manufacturing process. So those are just a couple examples that you kind of run into with modular construction. With digital tech integration, it's interesting there. What we're doing is, and for all the tech people that listen to this, you're going to understand, if you're a CIO or CTO, technology decisions today for healthcare are, if you think about it in the concept of facility and construction, are made at the end of that process. I've worked with a lot of health systems around the country, and it's pretty consistent, unfortunately. But the reality is that the technology conversation, the technology stack, what are we doing for hardware? What kind of wiring needs to be done? Is there, Bluetooth enabled sensors? Is there, VMware? All those types of conversations. They don't, for me personally, I think they happen too late. And so what we like to do from a modular standpoint is bring that technology conversation all the way to the beginning of the project. And the reason for that is because as I said earlier, we deliver a complete product, right? So if you aren't making those decisions today on what's inside your room, it becomes more of a challenge down the road to get, if you're a CIO or CTO, you'll appreciate this, to get that new technology into the building, because a million other decisions were already made and you're at the end of the line, and so something always falls off the table. So we like to bring those things in earlier on, to end up with a better product, and a better experience. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point for leadership doing these projects on behalf of the health system. It can't be too early to have these conversations, because the trade-off between the digital and the physical, it's never ending. So, but you don't want to overspend on the physical if downstream there's a lot of digital, let's say, settings coming, right? That form of patient care growing. Mm-hmm. So, I think you can always maybe expand capacity at the physical level. It's at some other point, but the digital realm's got to be considered early and often. So I think that's spot on.
Yeah, and I think, Keith, it's interesting. I look at IoT products today that are on the market for health systems, and we work with a couple partners there. And the interesting thing on, for example, Bluetooth connectivity and lighting and things like that, those things are traditionally, from a construction standpoint, are like a lighting decision. Right. And they're around, someone makes a lighting fixture decision. They don't think about it from a clinical standpoint. They don't think about, from informatics, can I, for example, track all my assets that are on the floor? Can I understand workflow? What are my clinicians? Where are they going? Where are they badged? Where they go in and out? So it's interesting because we have a situation in the industry where there's a lot of really exciting hardware that really needs to be implemented and thought about earlier on in the process, because the benefit and the gains for them are clinical in nature or technology in nature. And in many cases, that's not part of the conversation when someone's there trying to figure out what type of light bulb they want to put in a room,
So we could add letters to MEP. We could have L and C and other.
yeah, there we go. Keep going. Yeah. So.
Sorry.
No, all good.
All right, and let's talk about change management. Grant, how critical is change management to ensure a successful adoption of these smart room technologies?
Well, it's, I think, the holy grail of delivery in healthcare in general, change management, being able to understand that process, making sure whatever your client is about to adopt is understood in the organization, and ultimately that it's successful. in my previous career, as I mentioned earlier, I used to go around implement EHRs all over the country, and that was the big thing. You could have back then and still today, you could have the best EMR in the world, or you could have some cool, exciting new feature, but if you don't have your clinicians bought into it, it's not going to be successful. And so, I maybe grade ourselves a little bit too hard. I don't feel like I've ever been in a change management or led a change management situation which was 100% successful in healthcare, because it's such a complicated industry and there's so many moving pieces. It doesn't matter if I'm doing a building or rolling out an EHR to 10 hospitals in Massachusetts as part of a health system. There's always issues, right? I mean, and so that's the key thing. But it's important to understand that this is going to happen and working to identify that and address it up front and have the right champions within the organization to make sure that ultimately the implementation is successful. So yeah, just looking at my notes here. Sorry, hold
on. Any real world examples or specific strategies where you've seen a positive outcome in any of the deployments you've had?
Yeah. So, I mean, for us, I think where we've been the most successful is getting the C-suite involved earlier on. We generally work with, let's say, VP facilities, director of facilities. So we are working on implementing a real estate strategy, but it's important that we have executive team leadership and the C-suite working with the CEO or the CIO or the CFO, whoever that person that actually gets the vision, to support us. And the reason for that is, again, you have to have the ability to understand the bigger picture. Some larger health systems have like a chief strategy officer, so maybe that might be that person. But if it's not there, and then it's also not there at the end user. So the other part of I think that's most effective is making sure you plug the end users into the change management process also just as early as you find the champion, from the C-suite, because they're the people that spend every day in that facility that you build or in that product that you implement that they're using. And so you may have a implementation team for a construction project that includes your facilities folks, your project management, the general contractor, the architect, like all of these people. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But in that conversation, you should probably have either a physician who works on that floor, or a nurse a representative who works on that floor or has experience in exactly what you're building, because they will understand the pain points. I can't tell you, I've had so many conversations with clients of mine, and the facilities person will say, well, we're just doing it this way because that's the way we've always done it. And I say, okay, well, that's great. Should we check in with the clinician and see, maybe they don't like that they do it that way, and maybe they have a suggestion on a different way to do it. And the facilities person's not wrong, right? That's what they understand. And they're thinking about, how do I maintain this process that's there in 10 other buildings and have to do it again and again? But you have to be able to be willing to invite and be open to suggestions and change. So.
Let's talk about evaluating success and ROI. Grant, how do you measure and calculate an ROI from a modular construction project in terms of operational efficiency, cost savings, and care quality? Are there also any specific data points that you like to look at?
Yeah, so I mean, there's the traditional stuff that everybody in the industry, I think, captures, which is, I can build this building for X, and is it going to be more or less than Y, right? And in many cases, for me in the industry where I am today, I am selling people on the idea that taking this modular approach, using modular construction, is going to save you time and money. And the reason for that is really in a couple different factors, right? So the reality is, if I am simultaneously building in a factory while you're on site, I'm shortening your construction timeline. And if I'm shortening your construction timeline, your lender or your financing partner is probably going to like that, right? Because your carrying cost is going to be a lot less. If I am building in a factory and I'm using a repeatable process from a design standpoint, and we've settled on a sort of, let's say, a 1.0 room for your facility, I'm saving you money because we're going to be able to iterate off of that room, and we'll plug and play different technologies on a base of what a patient room should look like. But you can repeat that over and over again. So I think, there's those traditional metrics, but there's starting to become a lot of other interesting ROI opportunities within the building and the facilities themselves. And so, on these cases, I think it's still early. I referenced, the book I talked about earlier, the Covert Life of Hospital Architecture. The biggest thing about it was, Keith, to your point earlier about airplanes, every hospital is different. Or airports. Every airport's different. Every hospital's different. And we don't really seem to really think about how do we iterate. So, for us, as I mentioned with IoT and Bluetooth connectivity and things like that, we're going to have insight into, in our facilities, how well are they used? What's the efficiency of that layout? If I really like a home run type style hallway in my patient floors, I'm going to be able to now give you data to say, well, yeah, that's really interesting that we designed it this way. But my data in your actual facilities is telling me that your clinicians, they don't actually go down to the other end of that room or the end of that hallway, and they don't go into that staff room at the end that they talked about that they really wanted. So my suggestion to you is, in our next iteration, let's sit down with the clinicians and think about what else can we build instead of that staff room, so we can maximize your square footage. And when you're spending, in some cases, bed towers, billions of dollars, let's find a way to make sure we're efficiently, using that, using that capital. So I think, there's a lot of things that are the traditional mindset, cost per square foot, financing, things like that. But we're going to start to unpack a lot of other interesting insights where we think it'll drive, more efficiency and more return on that investment, going forward. So.
Yeah, I think that's an ongoing challenge to kind of get your arms around that idea of the, let's say, total cost of care versus ROI, because they're a lot of times, you're going to build a facility. Like, that's not really, what you're trying to decide. Maybe you're trying to mix and match feature functionality in the facility to scope the project. And then I think probably a lot of these projects end up with a lot of scope creep. It seems like just so much more predictable if you have the modular construction and you can spec what your requirements are, and there's just going to be fewer like downstream surprises, because any number of construction projects, like you say, with traditional, has got to have like over and over. That's just normal, like whether it's weather or whether it's, any number of, factors that interfere with construction that add cost that, you can avoid. So I think that's always one of the challenges in the industry, that everybody tends to maybe just go ROI when it's like, well, there's way more to it than just that. Like, it's a lot of complicated, like more thinking about more of the total cost of care over time.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And it's like the layout and design. I think people think about your operational expense, your capital expenses, and they say, well, everyone's playing some sort of, they're orchestrating something where they're moving, some things are CapEx, some things are OpEx, maybe, but we haven't really seen a lot of people that have taken that and overlaid that on top of the actual construction and design to say, well, okay, this facility may cost me $100,000. I'm not making these numbers up, a month to run, but let's actually understand, is this facility the right facility to begin with? Right? Like, I don't even know. And so let's put technology into that facility so I can actually measure it. As I said, talked about Drucker earlier. So how do I measure it and then monitor it and then make adjustments, for the next one?
Yeah. You have a baseline.
So exactly. Yeah. So.
Great. Well, Grant, I think we're kind of out of time for today, but I want to thank you for sharing your insights. During today's webinar, I think we accomplished a lot and focused on a lot of different material. You described how modular construction and smart technologies are revolutionizing the healthcare infrastructure. You gave us valuable insights on how to overcome implementation challenges. We talked about the importance of change management and how this could lead to improvements in care and operational efficiency. And you provide us quite a number of success stories and strategies for measuring and calculating ROI. Our discussion today also aligns closely with some of the research that Spyglass has done over the last year, in particular around digital patient engagement. For those of you not aware, Spyglass is a product and go-to-market advisory firm focused on disruptive technologies and growth opportunities within the healthcare and life sciences industry. Spyglass has more than 250 customers who are leading technology companies, management consulting firms, healthcare providers, and investment organizations. We've published more than 30 market reports over the last X numbers of years in a variety of different innovative informatics-related topics, including mobile computing, clinical communications, digital engagement, and telehealth. To explore Spyglass's extensive library of paid research and to gain a deeper insight into how technology is reshaping healthcare, I encourage you to visit my website at www.spyglass-consulting.com. Well, Grant, once again, I want to thank you for sharing your time, insights, and perspectives. I also want to thank our sponsors, Storage Systems and Simplify Medical, who made this conversation possible. Grant, would you like to provide us with any closing remarks?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if there's a takeaway for those listening today, we believe that industrial construction is the future for the healthcare industry. And if we can find a way to continue to unlock our healthcare IT point solutions that I mentioned earlier and integrate those into facility design and clinical workflow, then I think we will actually see some tremendous change because of the insights that we will gain from that type of construction. So hopefully you all learned a little bit more about that. And thank you again for having me on here.
Awesome. Keith, would you like to share any final thoughts on today's webinar?
I mean, I really appreciate your time, Grant, and really love the topic. I think we've spent a lot of time on Beyond the Blueprint exploring the digital realm, and this really kind of getting into the physical is really helpful, and I think very insightful in terms of like particularly capital efficiency, long-term strategies, just ways to continue to sort of bend that cost curve that everybody likes to talk about in healthcare. So really appreciate your time and really enjoyed the conversation.
Great. Thanks, Keith. Well, at Beyond the Blueprint, we look forward to continue our conversation with you in future episodes of the series. And hopefully, Grant, we can invite you back for to get some additional insights in the exciting world of modular construction for another informative discussion. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.